Okay, welcome everyone to TAM Lab number 68. Today we're super excited to have our very first customer-involved TAM Lab. So Christopher Price, who's going to be one of our presenters, has invited his customer, David Crown, to join us, and I'll let them do the introductions here. And then we've also got Mark McGill joining us, and we're going to be talking about a recent, not a vulnerability, but an issue potentially with vCenter server around some of the internal certificates potentially expiring. So it's a pretty big deal. In fact, if you log into the My VMware portal, I believe you actually get a splash screen that, kind of calls it out and tries to make folks aware because it could potentially impact your environment. So with that, I will stop my sharing here, and I think I'm going to hand it over to Mark first, and I'll let you do some introductions and take it away, Mark.
Sounds good. Thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen real quick, and I'm going to apologize in advance if I have any issues. I am away from my home office, and I have a very slow internet connection right now. So hopefully everything will go according to plan. So just some quick intros, and I'm going to let David Crown do his own intro a little bit more in depth. But my name is Mark McGill, Senior TAM with VMware. I've been with VMware about 5 years. Do a little bit more here, but like Steve said, this issue or anomaly came up in May and was announced, and we're just going to go over today some approaches of how I've dealt with it for my customers, and of course David dealt with it as a customer. And David is with the state of Delaware, and like we mentioned, Christopher Price is his TAM. And Christopher, I didn't know, and I apologize for not putting your name on there. Did you want to say anything real quick before we dive in?
Sure. With regards to David Crown as a customer with the state of Delaware, I want to preface this with I goaded David into doing this. We were discussing the two KBs, the one for identifying and the one for remediating the expired certs. And as our conversation progressed, I made mention of, this would be great if you could do this at scale across the environment. David had some concern with regards to security and having to touch each host. And we left the conversation with, well, that's too bad. I figured if anybody could do it, you could do it. Well, at 10:30 that night, David texted me, and he went into hold my beer mode and texted me at 10:30 at night and said, I've done it, it works. So David is one of the lead engineers with Delaware. His bosses will tell you that his role is to make them look good, and he takes that role very seriously. He's very intelligent. They're very heavy on the automation using Ansible. My reason for wanting to share this with you guys is as much about how David as a customer remediated this issue as it is about his use of Ansible as his primary tool to take care of that. So having said that, David Crown.
Thanks, Chris. So I'm the lead data center engineer for the state of Delaware, oversee storage, virtualization, compute, data center networking, all that goodness, and automating it all. And unfortunately, I have a small team to take on that big pile of responsibility. So it was kind of a hold my beer moment with remediating that. We've standardized on Ansible just to it creates a common framework across the organization. And the more people we have using it, it just becomes easier to troubleshoot. And when I get a little bit more into it, we'll look at some of the code and how I did it.
All right. Very nice. Let me know if you're not seeing my slides advance for any reason. All right. So what we're going to cover today, what is this announcement that was made and what's the impact? And then the solutions that we came up with to help automate, ease the discovery of any certificates that might be at risk of expiring. All right, little intro on me. We've already done that. Very active in trying to automate things. From a TAM perspective, I get questions all the time. How can we make this easier? What can we do? So I end up writing a lot of PowerShell scripts. So, and I've been doing that for a long time in the industry, just to make my life easier, make things more repeatable, less prone to error, and so I can work on more important things. So the STS signing certificate expiration is a very specific scenario. So there's what, like we were talking about prior to starting the recording, it could be almost a feast or famine type thing, or a all or nothing. If a vCenter server, could be the appliance or could be the Windows installation, was freshly deployed as 6.5 update 2 or later version of 6.5, it could have a certificate that expires in 2 years. Now, important thing to note is if you upgrade that same server, it will carry along that certificate, so it won't renew. So you can see this on 6.5, 6.7, or 7.0, depending on what your scenario is. And gets a little bit into detail here. So what's the impact? If those certs do expire, and when they do not announce that they're expiring, so you won't see any alert on vCenter until it's too late. So you're going to have a scenario where if you restart, some of your services on your vCenter will not restart. And you'll see those in the VPXD log, for example, you'll see that error. And also, when signing into the web client, you may see the signing certificate not valid, or you may see that nice error, which I'm sure all of us have seen at some point in our careers. The moral of the story is it's nice to detect it before it becomes a problem in your environment and you have people that can't log on to your vCenter. So the KB, and I've got a bunch of links at the end of this that will define where all this information is coming from. But that KB article offers a couple of solutions. And this, I think, is where we start getting into how could we do this a little better? How could we automate it, especially in large environments? So the current solution is a Python script. You have to SSH into your vCenter, run the Python script. It's going to give you back when that certificate expires. You also can log into the user interface of each vCenter, drill down into those certificates, and view them in there. Now, and one thing to note, the instructions that they provide are for the Flash client. Don't ask me why, because we assume everybody's using HTML5 now. The HTML5 client, you can drill down into the certificates as well. It's just in a different location. So take note of that. And to note, my customer has around 20 vCenters. I was talking to them about this and they said, how can we make it easier? We don't want to log into every vCenter. Most of them are not in a linked mode. And in some environments, they actually can't SSH into their vCenters. The renewing process, and I'll let Dave explain when he gets up how his process works. I did not, in the function that I wrote, I did not automate the renewal of it. It just identifies it. So as far as I know, the only way to still do that, you do have to SSH into the vCenter. They have a bash script in one of the KB articles, and you have to run that in order to renew the certificates. And if you notice, there's two different ones, VCSA, different processes, bash script for the appliance, PowerShell script for the Windows vCenter, which nobody's running anyways. All right, so this is where we get into the functions. So get STS certs, PowerShell function that you can load into your environment. It allows you to do the checks on multiple vCenters. So you can list every vCenter in your environment. There's a couple caveats though. You can't use Active Directory or other external authentication. It has to be the local, like if you leave it to the defaults, vSphere.local. It can be any account that you've created locally that does have admin privileges. I haven't drilled down to see what exact privileges are required to log in and check that information. At this point, assume that you'd need that same level of administrator permissions that administrator at vSphere local has. You need PowerShell 5 or higher, but you do not need PowerCLI. The reason being, the information on the certificates is actually stored in the local LDAP of the vCenter. So it's not actually doing any type of PowerCLI connection to there. And I do include the link there. I'll have that in the links at the end. Or you can just get STS certs, Google it, and it'll pop up to download it. Any questions so far? Everybody's nice and quiet, so doing an awesome job. And I include this if you're not familiar with PowerShell and don't know the syntax. There's some instructions, and this is also on the VMware code site, but you just have to load that function, and there's a couple ways to do it. And I can go over that if my demo works properly. Once you load that, the syntax is just, and this comes directly from the script, but get STS certs, you name the vCenter, you provide the user. Now, the password you can provide on the command line. Obviously, that's going to be plain text, but it's there if you did want to schedule it as a task, some way automate it to run once a month, once a quarter to check things. If you don't include the password, it's just going to prompt you for it. And at that point, all the characters are going to be hidden, or I can't say that word, we'll call it hidden. And so you can do it without exposing that password. And you also can create a simple array with every vCenter you want to include, and then just pass that into it. And you also can pipe it, and I think that's a little bit easier. I didn't capture that here, but vCenters, that variable, pipe to get STS certs. All right. And there's all our resources. What I'm going to do here real quick, if I can do it without breaking stuff, just a little bit of an example. And can you guys see PowerShell ISE?
Yep.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. All right, thank you. That part's working. The simplest way, if you open this up in PowerShell ISE, if you right-click that PS1 file and edit, this is what it's going to default to. To load the function, you can just hit that. Now it's loaded into your environment. You also can do the example where you do dot slash and the name of the, not going to auto complete for me. And that'll do the same thing. And for those of you who are really familiar with PowerShell, you can add this function into your environment permanently, but that is way outside the scope of today. So once we do that, now we can define our vCenter. In my environment, I only have one right now. And like I mentioned, it's got to be a member of the local LDAP. And it's going to prompt you for your password. Yay. I was praying that would work. So what we see here is just all that information. We see two certificates because it's a certificate chain. So we see the root certificate and the subordinate certificate. And as you can see here, most of the versions outside of that 6.5 update 2 and higher will be valid for 10 years. And you'll only see that 2-year expiration in that very specific scenario. And out of 4 customers that I have, only one, surprisingly the smallest one, who has 4 vCenters, actually had a cert. We checked it in June. It was expiring at the end of July. So a pretty good catch. And with that.
Hey, Mark.
Yes.
Quick question. I think I know the answer. I just want to validate. So for our VMC and AWS customers, this isn't something they should have to worry about, right? Because we offer that as a service, more or less.
Yes. And now I don't know that 100% for sure, but my assumption is that they have a different upgrade process, and I assume that it wouldn't be subject to that same issue.
Yeah, they shouldn't even have access to check, right? They don't have the permissions to SSH into vCenter, so.
That is a good question because it's not an SSH, it's actually an LDAP bind. So I know someone who could answer that question, but I don't know off the top of my head if it's actually possible.
Okay. Thanks.
So, fresh install when matters, it would be in VMC. And another question, will this slide deck be shared for customer consumption? And that might be a Steve question.
Yes, well, not the slide deck itself, but this is being recorded and it will be published to our YouTube channel. But yeah, if you want to reach out directly, I can try and make something work for you.
You said you're doing an LDAP bind to pull the certificates?
Correct.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, and it always surprises me when I'm reminded of that vCenter actually has a local LDAP, and it contains a lot of information in there. The only way and this came from one of the KBs, if you look at, I think it's the renewal script, it actually does that whole LDAP bind in there. So as far as I know, the API, excuse me, does not expose that information. So the only way to get it is through that LDAP bind.
Got it. Okay, cool. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions, or you can turn it over to Dave. I think his solution is a lot more elegant and a lot more automated from end to end.
Hey, Mark,
so it's,
hey, quick question. What
yes.
version of PowerShell are you using?
The one that I'm using on my local machine, I believe, is 5.1.
Okay.
And I say 5.0 and above just because I think it might work with earlier versions, but it's like, hey, at that point, update to 5. It's been out for a long time.
Well, the reason I was asking is because you're using the ISE, and I don't know if you saw that, but Microsoft depreciated that.
Yes, and I am aware of that, but it's still the default. And I think anybody who's well-versed in PowerShell will be moving on to the Visual Code Studio, I believe it is. But yeah, so for the lay person, if they go in there and they open that PowerShell file, it's still going to default to ISE at this point.
Cool. Okay. Thank you.
No problem. So with that, I'll stop sharing here, and Dave, it is all yours.
Cool. Thanks, Mark. All right. Let me see here. You guys see my screen all right?
Yep,
Absolutely.
looks good.
Cool. Thanks, guys. So I decided to take a different tact with that. As the great science fiction author Robert Heinlein said, progress is made by lazy men looking to do it better, not early risers. I'm the aforementioned lazy guy. So instead of, and before I get started, one of the things the higher pay grades do make me say, anything mentioned here is not endorsement of the state of Delaware. It's not a recommendation. Code opinions are my own, and use this at your own risk.
All right.
So I log into the Skyline portal review this with my TAM, Chris, and we see this vague message going, hey, you may have certificates expiring in your environment. You may not. Here, go follow this knowledge base article to look at this. So given the challenge of our environment where we have 5 SSO domains across 7 vCenters, 2 of those environments are air-gapped from the rest of the network. I have a small team with varying skills. Humans are often failable, and my budget's iffy, so I don't get to spend for a lot of, I have this whiz-bang tool and this whiz-bang tool. I have to be very judicious with the tools that get implemented. So we focused a lot on automation with Ansible. It gives us a human-readable approach. But to automate something, you need a well-defined process. And you take that well-defined process and you turn it into code, be it a PowerShell script, a Bash script, a Python script, whatever. But that process also has to have minimal input from a human. Great. So I have on one hand, I got this great knowledge base article that says, hey, we got a Python script. Download this Python script, parse the output. This will tell you whether or not you have an expiring cert. If you have an expiring cert, we have this other knowledge base article over here that says, hey, run this bash script and put your password into the command line. Well, once again, 7 vCenters, small handful of humans. So it became a hold my beer moment. And as Chris mentioned, he kind of goaded me into it. We're kind of overachievers. So everything that I'm doing today is open source, free as in speech, free as in beer. I actually have the code published out on GitHub. Ansible itself is a free and open source tool with an option to transition into a paid support model using Visual Studio Code. And while Ansible itself requires you to run it from a Unix type machine, be it Mac OS, Linux, BSD, there is a vagrant file that if you or another customer wants to spin this up on a Windows host, you can do it, and it'll actually spin up an environment to run the plays against. So we're going to do a couple demos. We're going to take a quick look at the code, see what it looks like, run through it. We're going to run the script against a single vCenter, and we're going to force a certificate renewal. We're also then going to do 4 vCenters and 4 external PSCs because I'm an overachiever. And then we're actually going to take the solution and put it in the Ansible Tower and show actually how we would run this in our production environment so that, if say from 6 months from now, we run into an expiration, we're still covered. And I get to be the lazy guy and just have this done for me. Any questions so far?
No, I'm looking forward to it.
All right, cool. And with that, let's look at some code. So this, at a high level, is an Ansible play. A play runs against your well-defined inventory. So here's my inventory. It's just a simple text file listing of groups, my SSO domains, and the vCenters, and I had to put a flag in there for what the server does. So I can do the restart order in an automated and correct approach. So the way the script works is, or the play works is, I actually didn't rewrite anything from VMware. I wanted to take VMware scripts and run them against my 7 VCSAs and do as little modification as possible. In the off chance that something goes wrong, it's still VMware's officially supported tools from VMware's knowledge base articles. So, and to make the process reusable, I chopped into what's called roles. And a role is just a module like you would have in PowerShell. The bulk of the play is actually managing flags for reporting. And whether or not the vCenters themselves have internet access, because not all environments, you're going to allow your vCenters to get out to the internet. There's some error handling with the Ansible equivalent of a try catch or a block rescue. But we download the script either locally and copy it up or directly to the vCenter, run the script and parse the output. And if we find that it's within a year that's expiring, we drop a single file on the control station, which is where your Ansible runs from, download the bash script from VMware, and tweak the script so that I can pass in with an environment variable my administrator at vCenter password. The reason we do it with a password is when I show you when we shift this into Tower, that's how Tower wants to pass it around. So that Tower can do this in a secure manner and I'm not leaving passwords everywhere. And then if the flags are set correctly, it'll also email out a report of everything that it finds. So if my certificates are expiring in 5 years, then it's going to say, okay, your certificates are expiring in 5 years. You don't need to worry about it. So I've already taken the liberty of spinning up the 9 VCSAs and getting my SSH key copied over. For those that aren't familiar with an SSH key, it's a way of doing passwordless authentication with what is essentially a certificate. So let's run our first one. Dash playbook. Apply KB. And let's report on, let's just do a report with some verbose output. So you can see from our output, that's right. These are certificates of the thumbprints and their expiration dates. If I want to do a restart, I would say, this way we're not just randomly changing certificates. You apply a flag. And for the demo, we've actually have a force flag.
So then you're running through this. What are we expecting to see? So you just ran through, you showed us a couple certs with some dates. Is this going to actually replace those?
Yep. Actually, I forgot. I have one bug I haven't worked out yet. And that is, I have to set my super secure password.
Yeah.
Because there's a $sign in the password, Bash interprets it as a separate variable, and it causes problems with me trying to pass it in line. So what we're going to see now is it's going to now download the bash script and run it against my single vCenter.
Okay.
And it's actually now, you can see it renewing against that vCenter environment. And since the knowledge base article says we have to stop all of our services, start all of our services, do that as part of it.
Got it.
Yeah, if you have the tool to do it, it's one thing to say, okay, run this command, now run this command, follow it up with these commands, or I can take all those commands, put it into an Ansible play, and just go, you know, one statement, one tool, and I can hand it off to somebody else and I can go on vacation. I like vacations.
So real quick then, so the process, does it require you to manually restart the services, or like not yours, but the KB article itself, right?
Yes.
The manual instructions. So you have to run the script and then you have to manually do stuff, right?
Correct.
Do you know what happens if you replace the cert but not restart the services?
I was not feeling that froggy.
Okay.
I'm sure somebody in GSS could answer that question, but certain things like messing around with certs and not restarting services, just kind of, no, not feeling that bold.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, part of me is just thinking, right, for some of our customers out there that might try and figure out, how do we stage this? How can, you know, is there some prep work that we can do to control, you know, availability of vCenter?
I'm just going to go with what I would do is to control availability, because I put a flag in here on whether or not to even do this, or to do your whole service, you know, to renew the certificate and restart services. You could have this play running daily to report on the environment, and then run it at your choosing at a later date to say, okay, it's now, we have our change control window, we can have our outage, we've shut down our vCenters, we've taken snapshots, brought the environment back online, and fired away. Or if it's, say, you know, a smaller environment, you could have an Ansible play run, you know, that takes a snapshot beforehand, and take your snapshots and do all that in preparation if you have, say, a larger, much more distributed environment. Does that answer your question, Bill?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. No, thank you.
Yeah, unfortunately, the demo hardware that I'm using is not the fastest in the world. And when you're on the clock, restarting services is not always the quickest of operations.
It always goes slower when more eyeballs are watching, trust me.
Yeah, or the environment's been down for hours and this is the last step. It seems to take forever.
That's all right.
So what I did want to ask, if I could, so this Ansible script goes through and replaces the certificate and restarts the services. Are you doing anything in terms of like a routine check-in or alerting through Ansible or a script, just to kind of, hey, I want a daily, weekly, monthly report of the certificate status?
Yes. So the way that I'm handling that, and I'm going to flip back to the code while this is running, is I put a flag in here to generate an email report. And if I don't set the flag to replace certificates, and I say, hey, you know what, send me reports instead, I'll just get a report every time it runs in my inbox. And when I show you guys the Tower side of this, and for the demo, I've actually taken the upstream flavor, AWX, which is the free unsupported beta version. And you can have it run that on whatever schedule makes you happy. So that you're not running this from the command line, having to even remember to run it from the command line, whatever. You create the job, attach a schedule to it, and just
And Tower takes care of it.
Exactly. All right. Let's go ahead while we're running, log into our Tower environment. All right, so this is a fresh Tower environment. I did put my certificate, or my SSH keys at least, in here to test it out. So we start with linking this to a project. And a Ansible project is a one-to-one relationship to a Git project. All right, we put our URL in here. Hit save. Tower itself wants to keep as little information, or Tower wants to keep you in using a source control tool like Git instead of trying to keep everything inside of Tower itself, so that your normal development / DevOps tools, it works within that framework instead of trying to build its own new framework. So we create our project, and it has successfully synced. We can see that from the green dot right here. We're going to go ahead and create a new inventory, and you can either manually specify a inventory, or you can actually store it in Git. Source from a project. Here's my vCenter.ini file. And let's sync in our inventory now.
So you're syncing the inventory. So that's actually going and pulling the active list of vCenters, and
It's pulling them as you have it defined in your Git repo.
got it.
So I actually, for this project, because it's just a demo environment, and as soon as we're done, I'm tearing it down, I actually included the inventory as part of the Git repo.
Got it.
So now even the servers that I'm running this against is in an environment that is audited, controlled, and I have the rest of the enterprise controls that I would expect around my code. Now, just because, and just for the record, just because I'm using GitHub doesn't mean you have to use GitHub as your Git server. Customers can choose to run their own on-premise. They can run private repos. So they don't have to put their entire inventory on the internet or their code available to the internet.
Sure. As long as AWX in this instance can see it,
Correct.
it'll be happy. Got it.
And as we can see, it's now pulled in the entire environment. And just, all right, let's log into our Now, one of the things that's mentioned in the knowledge base article is you only want to do certificate replacement on one PSC or embedded vCenter with embedded PSC in your environment. You don't want to do this across your entire environment. So to work around that, that's why I have a flag for master, PSC, all, or vCenter. And it's actually documented in the GitHub repo what the various settings are and how to build this out. I'll show you what the demo environment looks like. But this is the build out for our complex environment.
So then, real quick to that point, with that logic, by making the change, excuse me, to a single PSC, right, in a linked environment, we're expecting that to replicate to all the other nodes?
Correct.
Okay.
And that's, or at least that was my impression from, the knowledge base article and the scripts. And since it is stored in a replicated LDAP topology that's used within the vCenter environment, I just took what VMware said is gospel since it's your product.
Yeah, right.
So the inventory file, you can actually see where I'm specifying which server I want to run this against. In this case, I'm actually going to say my STS master, I'm calling that PSC East 1. I have 3 other vCenters, or PSCs, and 4 more vCenters. And the flag actually determines the restart order, not the order in the text file.
Got it.
So now I'm going to go ahead and create my credential. Now, even though for this there is one specified, I don't need the host name. I do need to specify my username. Most importantly, super secure password. And now lastly, I'm going to build a template with the project, the inventory, and the credentials. Oops. New project. vCenters. I pick my project, pick my credential, and
So real quick, your credentials are showing as blank.
oh, sorry.
Okay, good.
So I actually need to do two credentials. One is the SSH key, so that when Ansible is running on Tower, it can actually SSH into my vCenter.
Okay.
And I'm going to now pick my handy dandy vSphere credential as well, which has my administrator vSphere password. And this is going to inject that password into the environment just in time. I copy it over just in time to the vCenter servers. And then when it's done, it gets pulled out of the environment. It's not written to files anywhere.
Got it. So an assumption here, since you are leveraging SSH shared keys, I'm assuming that SSH is enabled as a service on your VCSAs, right?
Correct.
Okay, so your script isn't actually going through and like temporarily enabling it, checking, and then disabling it through like an API?
Correct.
Okay, got it.
Because we leverage Ansible for other things in our environment, one of the things that's in my tool bag is setting up the template file for the machine SSL certificate.
Sure.
So I have a play that will copy up the latest login site agent and install login site agent with my configuration, generate the template so that when I run the certificate manager, I just have everything filled out and I just have certificate manager generate my certificates. We prefer to lean on our first hop firewall for that extra security of controlling what networks can even SSH into our vCenters. But we treat our vCenters more like Linux servers than an appliance.
Got it.
So Bill, we actually have this conversation about leaving the SSH service enabled at least once a month. And I think it's more for my own personal assurance that I'm reminded why they choose to go that route. But yeah, we definitely have this talk on a regular basis.
Well, and I mean, talking about that kind of stuff, a lot of it is just, it's a function of risk acknowledgement and management, and everything's Correct. A design decision, right? So I'm not trying to say yay or nay on any of that stuff. It's just more of an assumption or an observation, right? Like to use the code that you have published on the internet for other customers, you just need SSH enabled to make sure it'll work right.
You need SSH enabled, and you also need to do
sure.
Bash needs to be the default shell.
Ah, good call out there too.
Yeah, I did put that in the README for the repo.
Oh, great.
So and the reason, and what Ansible actually does under the covers is it creates one-off Python scripts, copies them up to that server and runs them on that server. And the appliance shell doesn't let me do that.
Yep.
But like I said, we made the conscious decision to treat our VCSAs not as appliances, but more Linux servers, and we get a little bit more flexibility out of it.
Okay.
So I have now created a job or a template, and I'm going to launch this template against the environment.
Now, is this the one that looks at is this the 4 linked
Correct.
environments? Okay.
And you can actually see it running through. It's now run the command to actually replace the certificates. And now we're doing the restart the servers or the services in order. And it's going to go through starting with the server it first replace their certificate on. It's then going to replace certificate or restart the services on the PSCs, and then finally all the vCenters.
So then is it watching to make sure, like, all right, the primary server is back, now I'm going to restart the other ones? Or is it kind of doing a cascading one where, 1, 2, 3, 4, restart in that order, the primary and then all the subsequent ones, and then they, in theory, come up in the correct order?
So yes to both questions.
Oh, okay.
So one of the things, and I guess I should have led into this a little bit more, one of the things that makes Ansible unique, actually not just Ansible, other tools that are designed for configuration management versus a traditional scripting language like PowerShell or Python or Perl, Bash, what have you,
Yeah.
is the stuff that you need to set up your to do a job. For example, checking the return code from restarting services. That there's already a framework that our operating systems provide us for maintaining that service. So when we run, restart services, if it errors out, it's going to return an error code or return code of non-zero. It's going to give me something that's not zero that says, hey, an error occurred. Ansible's watching for that. So I didn't have to code around that. So if Ansible runs into any condition where it did not succeed successfully, it just stops. It goes, oh, I give. So for restarting the services, so I had to make sure that things get done in the right order. I had to go do a little complexity. I had to go around the barn door.
Yeah.
To do this. But I use the roll flag to determine when I'm going to reboot at each step or restart services at each step. If one step fails, then it's not going to proceed to the next step. And for the serialization, which is, do I want to do one server at a time or multiple? There's actually an Ansible setting called serial. And I could say, okay, well, I only want to do one vCenter at a time. I would then say serial equals 1. So I actually have the ability to control that as it's running.
Got it.
So
I mean, my concern with stuff like that is, in the event. So like like you're saying, if Ansible runs into an error, it kind of freaks out, right? I would hate to be in a position where if there was some kind of error, all the rest of my vCenters also decided to restart because they were told to, and suddenly have an outage.
Yeah. No, actually, if at any one point the job has an error, it doesn't progress past any of the others.
Okay, cool.
But then again, also, I would not be running with the fix flag that causes things to reboot in a blind manner at night for like a linked SSO environment.
David, time check.
Oh, yes. Thanks, Chris. So unfortunately, from this point, the play is going to run for another 20 minutes, and I'm pretty sure none of us wants to watch vCenters restart services for that time.
So that's roughly 20 minutes in your lab. I think, what we all recognize is our environments, lab, test dev, prod, whatever they are, they're all going to have their own set of times based on size, load, everything else. But kind of finger in the air, based on your production experience in your labs, like how long, I mean, would you expect this to take for your environments?
For my environments, I would expect to be closer than to 10 minutes.
Okay.
I have much nicer hardware, much nicer storage in my production environments than my home demo lab. I also don't have to worry about the electric bill in production.
True. But if you were to do this once, the manual way, let's follow the KB, how long would it take you to run it just following the process manually?
I'd put it somewhere around a half an hour to an hour.
Per thing?
Per environment.
Per environment, okay.
And the nice thing, I'm not so much worried about how long the job actually takes to run. I don't consider that if it's faster than what a human would do, that's a bonus. For me, what's more important is I can then take something like this process, put it in, codify it, take the knowledge base article and the scripts, codify it, and say, okay, cool, here's the code to run. And I can hand this over to a junior engineer, knowing that these are using VMware supported tools and methods. And it's done in a way that someone else doesn't have to go, oh crap, how do I do this? All right, now I gotta get the crypto onto the server.
Right. So I know you're in the middle, so you're running through this. Could you just humor me for a second and go back to your first example with the single vCenter? Yeah. What does it look like now? Now, I'm assuming it's probably done, right?
Oh, yeah, it's been. And let's take off our flags and run the script again and just see what the
report.
Yep.
Oh, cool.
And unfortunately, running through the demo in preparation, I forgot to revert to snapshot for this single server.
Got it.
But let's see here. Our thumbprint is 1A31C. You can actually see our thumbprint did change.
Perfect. All right. So we have a new cert there.
Correct. And if I don't put the force flag in here, you'll see it'll run through and not just blindly change the certificates.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I wanted a way so this way we can actually show replacing certificates without trying to go through the machinations of getting that an expiring cert.
Got it. Let's see. Okay, cool.
Yeah, sorry, I should have been a little bit more clear on that force flag.
One thing I like to call out when I show people some Ansible stuff is also just for the sake of kind of keeping everything together, compartmentalized, excuse me, is the importance of the task names. So I think here you've done a pretty darn good job there of, we can walk through these tasks and you can actually see the different steps that you did, right? Because there's a lot of output here. But if you focus on the task titles, it actually makes a lot of sense on the approach that you're taking.
Thanks. Yeah, one of the things I learned from Red Hat, they were doing a Ansible Fest over in DC. They were preaching to government customers, such as myself, although more was the federal base, was using Ansible not just as an automation tool, but as a way of documenting your compliance.
Yeah.
Government customers tend to focus on compliance and showing and the documentation therein. So that was one of the things that they stressed on, was like making your plays read in a way that you can hand it to somebody else and go, this is what I'm doing. Let me run this. And you can actually see, this is my compensating control to show that I'm compliant with this standard.
Yeah. All right. Well, I know we're kind of at the tail end of this. Anything else worth showing?
Yeah, I don't see any questions in the Q&A or chat. All right.
Oh.
So
Well,
knowing that David and his organization take automation to a level that most of our customers probably do not, was everybody able to follow along with at least the concept of what David's done here?
yeah, for sure.
Okay.
I'll probably have to go back and watch it again because I'm new to Ansible and just general automation, right? But I love the fact that you took the time, David, to jump on here and share with everybody. I mean, that's kind of the whole spirit of TAM Lab is like, TAMs don't know everything. I learn things from my customer all the time, right? So it's awesome to kind of showcase that and, just share the knowledge that we've learned. So really appreciate your time.
Thanks. And there is a Vagrant file in there, which will actually, if you're on a Windows environment and you go through the gyrations to set up Vagrant and whatever hypervisor you want to run this with, you can actually spin up I can't type today. It'll actually spin you up a Linux VM and install everything for you.
Oh, save some time.
Like I said, I'm lazy.
That's a good thing.
All right.
Cool. On that, I will stop sharing my screen.
David, thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we're a little bit past the hour. Anyone got any final thoughts? Again, Mark, Christopher, David, we super appreciate, all your efforts here. This has been great.
Thanks for the opportunity to share.
Anytime.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. Well, I'll let you go. Have a good rest of your week and a great weekend.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
All right.
Thanks.
Take care.
Bye.